forestalled that. Okay, so where does conservation fit into that? One way of looking at it is something that my boss at Princeton, when I was in grad school, came up with. So here goes. So now we're talking about carbon emissions, and it sort of has the same slope as energy, no supplies, because most of our energy is fossil fuel. So this is billions of tons of carbon emitted per year, and the world right now is about 7. So historically, up, and so here we are, and if we keep going, then we get to 2055, and the point here is if we wait until then to really get serious about stabilizing CO2 levels, we're going to be stabilizing at something like 850 ppm, which is about parts per million, which is about 3 times pre-industrial levels. And there's some consensus that being closer to twice pre-industrial levels, which was like, well, 270 was pre-industrial, and so if it could be like 500 or 550, it's likely to be a better deal for the climate. Is that me? No, that's outside. So to do that, it would sure be nice to stabilize how much carbon we're pumping into the atmosphere about where we are now. And the problem with carbon is not that it's toxic or something, but it just stays around a long, long time before the oceans soak it up. So if we would rather be here than going up here, then we have to do something to get rid of carbon emissions associated with tons of carbon associated with that green triangle. And it's not as hard as it looks. The sort of feel-good message here is that if we collectively do a lot of things, they can add up. So you can take that big triangle and divide it into smaller little wedge pieces, and maybe you can sequester some carbon, plant more trees, maybe there's more room for nuclear fission, maybe not. Conservation, that's us, and renewable electricity is up there. So buildings could be 1 or 2 of these things depending on how aggressively opportunities are pursued. And the idea with that is, let's do what we can and hope that in the next 50 years or so, the smart people who are working on things like photovoltaics will get the cost down enough that we can just kick the fossil fuel habit altogether and transition to some other economy. Maybe even before we run out of fossil fuel. The Stone Age did not end when we ran out of stones. And the same thing could be true for oil. If we wanted to do that in the US, apologies to anyone from this part of the country, this is the area we would have to cover with photovoltaics to generate the amount of power we need for our current economy. And it doesn't look so big, but if you drive out there, it's still a pretty big distance, and it's that area, and it's pretty expensive right now. So how do we do some of this in buildings? Our government deserves some credit, and I'm not a big promoter of lots of things the federal government does, but that's another talk. What do I want to say about this? Okay, 2 big things here. One is it is possible to train builders to do better, and that means getting out of sort of what they typically do and giving them some comfort that they can do something a little different. And it can be done at scale. And the other, like tens of thousands of houses, and the other is how do people do it? And it's pretty simple, really. You can save, a third, 40–45% of your heating, air conditioning, and hot water bill at this new houses at no increase in what you're going to pay, what the sticker price for the house is, which sounds like a good deal. And the way to do it is simply have the builder spend more on the walls and less on the heating and cooling equipment. If you've got better insulation, better windows, tighter construction, then your heating loads and cooling loads aren't as high. Then you can have smaller ducts, smaller boilers, smaller air conditioning. Some climates maybe no air conditioning at all. And it comes out about even, first cost-wise. So that's great. The message with these things is they look like modern-day versions of, Leave It to Beaver houses, right? They're nothing, they don't scream something like a place where hippies would live or whatever. They're like suburban houses. They look like the house next door. So you can have pretty much anything you want, and there's a third lower. You know, and a third's a big deal. If buildings are 40% of our energy use in this country and we knock a third out of that, that's more than 10% total. Don't have to tell people much here about windows. You're probably into it a little bit. But here's so benefits of better windows. So annual heating costs for a typical house in Boston. This is a Department of Energy slide. So if we have single pane windows with aluminum frames, which get cold in the winter, a house so equipped might use, according to our Department of Energy, $1,500 of energy a year. This is a couple years old, so prices are probably higher now. Double pane windows, clear glass with wood or vinyl frame, so you're saving a quarter, and that's worth several $100 a year. And if you go to fancier windows with the metal coating, or the sort of the coatings on the glass, better, and triple pane even better. Now, of course, these things are going to cost. Windows are $400 or $500 a pop. So you know, the time to do this is when you decide you don't want leaded paint on them, or they're otherwise in somewhat sad shape. But if one is buying new windows or speccing a house, it's worth getting good windows. Light bulbs. Jean talked about your nice recycling basket there, so it has some of these things in it. We have a lot of them in our house. I have gone around very diligently. They're a lot smaller than they used to be, right? When they first came out, they're these big, heavy, clunky things. You can get them so that they go in almost any place now, little ceiling fixtures, kitchen fixtures. They're great. The standard incandescent light bulb in these units sort of measure efficiency, how much light you get per watt out of it, 10 lumens per watt. These things in this size, 60 or so, 70. So you're using about a quarter of the power in these, and they last 10,000 hours rather than 800 hours. So and they're cheap now. You wait till, I don't know, Home Depot has them on sale, and they're less than $1 a pop or something. So I would urge you all to bid on that thing back there, and even if you don't get it, just go buy some. I give these to my students sometimes and say, well, just go put them in and use them. Do you have hazardous waste pickup in North Reading? Yeah. So when they finally go, because they have mercury in them, you can. So you shouldn't just be tossing them in the trash, and that's a little bit painful. But other than that, they're pretty good. What kind of street lights do you have in North Reading? Are they the sodium ones that make everything look yellowish, or do they have better colored tone? You've been in cities or like parking lots where the lights look, they're sort of bluish yellow color. You know, ever wonder why they do that? Is it people like me who are just they have no artistic sense at all? People do it because they're efficient. Those are sodium lamps, and they're good for places where you don't mind if everyone sort of looks pasty gray at night or something. So towns sometimes decide they don't want that because of the color rendition. Okay, one more thing about appliances. So another message here is it's available without a V. That's a shame. Maybe your eyes can't see that. Washing machines, so 2004, this is kilowatt hours per cycle. This is an energy unit. This is what the government said. You couldn't be any more than this. Energy Star label, you couldn't be any more than this. 2006, the best available, quite a bit lower. The feds in 2007 said, here's your new limit. And the point here is that if you're shopping for a washing machine, pay attention to the energy labels. You can do better than the minimum. The federal government says you can't buy a total piece of crap right now. You can't be swindled, but you still have a lot of choice about what you buy, and it's worth doing some consumer investigation. Same thing for air conditioners. The best available in 2006 was down here. This is ground source heat pump, so that's a little fancier. We have sort of lines of water under your lawn or something. Hot water heaters the same, and for most of this, if we're into this, it's best to do the comparative shopping before something breaks, because when particularly hot water heaters break, you're not going to want to do that, right? You want to pick up the phone and say, get it here, and so that I don't, I can take a shower or something. And washing machines, you're not going to wait all that long either. So sort of have something in mind, and then when the time comes, you're ready to go. I don't want to say this, or is this too nerdy? We'll see something here. So here's one sort of graphical way of looking at this. I'm a homeowner, I'm going to go buy a house. Let's say I buy something that just meets energy code, and my energy bills are going to be $1,200 a year. That's probably not around here, maybe it's Oklahoma or someplace. I can cruise down this green line which is what I'm paying per month, and get some energy savings if I simply work with the builder and say, more insulation please, smaller heating plant. And I get down to around a third or so, and then I start, if I want more savings, this little blue stuff says, I have to amortize that to say, okay, I want even better windows, I want even more insulation, but it's going to cost me more up front to do that. So maybe I include that in the mortgage if I find a lender who can do that with me, and that's this little piece here. Meanwhile, my energy use keeps going down, 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 but as I go along, I'm having to amortize more and more energy improvements. And you get past this minimum here, and then notionally, it's not worth it. You say, well, I'll pay for another inch of insulation, or the very best windows, but it doesn't save enough to make up for the first cost. Maybe your heart's in the right place environmentally, and you're willing to come back up here until you're no worse off than you were had you bought just a house that barely meets code. In the US, this last leap, which is a pretty big one, and ends up with a huge cost increase, is photovoltaics on the roof. So if you say, I really want to go to zero for whatever personal or reasons or otherwise, the last step is going to cost you a lot, according to the sort of normal way of thinking about things. So the question for all of us is, okay, that may be true in general or according to some government study. Are there counterexamples that say we can get closer to zero without having to spend a fortune on the PV? Let me depart from this just for a second and say that much of this is new construction. Many of us may never have a house built for us or move in a new house. So do we go to sleep at this point or eat the cheese and crackers and then bolt? I hope not. In our house, I of all people should keep better track of the numbers, but at some point I lost some of my records of utility bills. We're down a good third, and maybe more, than we were when we moved in 12, 14 years ago. One of the first things I did was, it's I don't know, how old's the house, 150 years or early 1800s, something like that? More than that, maybe 170 years. 2x4 construction. I had ground up newspapers blown in the walls, the cellulose stuff, take the clapboards off, drill through the substrate. I went up above the attic, very hot and sweaty, put more insulation up there, and it came down, I don't know, 20, 25%. The boiler finally went, it had asbestos insulation and all sorts of stuff on it, and it said, well, it's just time to do something else. Got the best thing I could find that produces steam. That's not the most efficient, maybe heating system compared to some other things, but given what we had, so we went from oil to gas and got the efficiency up from, I don't know, probably some of the 60s or some of the 80s. Went down another 10, 15%. Electricity's down from all of this stuff, and unplugging things, probably a quarter. So that's kind of encouraging. We can do almost as well as some of those new houses, even in older houses. All right, here's a house. So can we do better than that? All right, next step of things. Here's a house in Florida. No comments on style. You like it, you don't. It's typical Florida on-grade slab thing. The windows are well shaded. What you don't see is it's got pretty good insulation in the walls. It does have PV on the roof. So compared to the neighboring house, which was just sort of meets code in Lakeland, Florida, near Orlando, what's the deal here? The circle here represents the typical house. That's just how much energy, a little pie chart. This part of it is what this house saves, not because of the PV, but it has better windows, it has shading to keep out the Florida sun. It's got insulation where Florida houses typically don't, not because it's hot there, but just to keep the heat out. And so you save something like 70, 73% just from what the builder can do for you. If you want to put the PV on, which is going to cost you a lot, you can nibble out that much and then you're down to about 15% less left with just this PV. So my message is forget that because it's expensive, and if you can save almost